Wasn't
that great?
That was pretty cool.
It was pretty cool. I have to ask that kid with a Joe Burrow sweatshirt in a sustainability class. We thought about that.
You actually have something.
No, don't get your hopes up too much. It's a long season. Huh. I love this.
I have a wireless mouse, but like I figure like the signal kind of messed up this point.
Oh, but that's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It's pretty easy to do. Pretty easy to manage. Is it all set? Is it going? Are we
I started
live?
recording everything started.
It's recording?
So, so no worries. I'll just start
Nice.
whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Update. Always want me to update. All right, thanks, Thomas. Okay, so, well, for the 5 of you who are here, value. Sum of probability times x. You guys get that? About that? Yeah?
Second real test.
Yeah, you know what it means? Everybody knows what that means? That'll be on a test. Only you guys know it. Yeah, we'll put that on the test. Not only you guys know it. That'd be great. Just don't tell anybody.
I don't know what it means though.
You don't have to.
I mean, I can't even read it.
I'll tell you. I know, I can't. I didn't write it up there. This is not my class. It was someone else's class. Sorry.
I still memorize it.
I don't want to. Anyways, okay, so we're gonna talk about this time dimension. This is great. I love this. This is awesome. You guys are the best. Thanks for being here. It's great to have you here. It's kind of sad. It was like so many people at first week of class, and I was like, yeah, so cute, but it's okay. Goodbye. All right. So, anyone know what that is? This is another great picture. What is it? Holy cannoli. It's canola. You ever heard of canola? Yeah. It's so this is up in Canada. It's nice. They got some great non-renewables going out there in the middle of the field. It's sucking some natural gas out of the ground. There's a big canola there, which is going to be used for biodiesel. Right? Is that awesome? Okay, whatever. So, time dimension and non-renewable resources. The time dimension is all about, right? When I just use the word time dimension, that's like the modern thing of transition, right? You're back in the old days, we're starting at time dimension. Over time, things change. Now we talk about big transitions, and we're in the middle of one. So here we go. Okay, non-renewable resources. We're just gonna talk through those. I have decided to get rid of all of the most heinous parts of this. You guys aren't gonna know that you love me. All right. That sounds ridiculous, but if you were here last year, you would have needed it. If you knew what we're gonna do this year. So anyway, we're in great shape. What are non-renewable resources? Slow to regenerate if they regenerate at all. Okay, so coal, that's kind of slow to regenerate. What's coal? Old humans, old plants, old stuff, right? Billions of years ago. Okay, maybe difficult to extract. That's oil out there in California, Southern California. That's so beautiful beaches that were nice to go on. Has anyone been to Santa Barbara, yeah. What's the most beautiful feature of that? Santa Barbara.
I can either the ocean or I think that I remember looking out into the sea with the.
What happens if you go and you look at the sea and then you look to the right? What do you see? An oil refinery. I mean, come on, they got an oil refinery right there. You can look in the ocean, you can look at beautiful oil refinery.
You could like see them out like kind of in the ocean too, like far off, but they were all spaced out, like you could see. that they-
Ships?
Not ships.
What?
Like it looked like something like that.
Oh, derricks, yeah.
Yeah.
They got around there. Yeah. Pretty amazing out there. Yeah, so they got a lot of it still going on out there. Pretty fascinating. So, but non-renewable resources are, slow to regenerate, difficult to extract, but also really heavily affected by technological change. All right, so that's an important part of the story we're going to try to tell today. Prices reflect scarcity. I mean, this is economists love prices. I mean, they're the favorite thing. Why? Because they contain all kinds of information, right? And it's just super exciting for me. I mean, when I look at this, man, I cannot tell you how excited I get when something like this. I'm like, wow, that's just the most amazing stuff ever. Because you can detect a lot of stuff just by looking at this, right? So what's interesting is that these non-renewable resources, the prices for them haven't really gone up much over time, right? So historically, way back in the 1800s, the oil price was as high as it was a decade ago. And actually now we're back, the $70, we're going up to $80. Actually, barrel of oil futures were $80 the other day, yesterday. So we're back at these higher prices for this stuff, right? But still, it's not as high as it was way back when, right? And when we look at these other commodities, those prices haven't really risen much over time. We can see periods where they rose, and we can explain why they went up in different time periods, right? But nonetheless, the price of most of this stuff in real terms has stayed pretty constant, right? I mean, these are inelastically demanded and supplied things. They're hard to get out of the ground. So you have really inelastic demand and supply. What happens? Prices fluctuate a lot, right? There's just a little bit of a shock to either demand side or the supply side, then you're going to get these huge fluctuations, and they can last for some time period, right? So, but nonetheless, it's fascinating. We're just not seeing it tick up, even though they're non-renewable. What's so fascinating about these? The prices of the commodities in the Fed. Anyone know what the Fed is? You guys know what the Fed is? What's the Fed? It's famous example of all history. Bet. You guys ought to go read the Bet. It's a great book. You wrote it. Really good writer. I'll say this, something like that. I think. Really good writer. It's not a long book. It is one of it's an interesting read. So I recommend reading it. So there's this fascinating historical thing that happened in the 1970s. What was the big worry? What was going to happen to the Earth? 1970s. It's going to end, right? So Paul Ehrlich was saying that the population bomb, too many people. The Club of Rome told us that what was going to happen. We had these models, these computer models, we finally had computers that told us that the world really was going to end. Right? We're running out of stuff, and the only solution was that humans would have to be like the rest of the animals. I guess we are, but hopefully we're not going to be like them. But we have to be like the rest of them, and we would just, kill ourselves off, right? That's basically what the Club of Rome. You guys heard of the Club of Rome? Meadows and Meadows, etc. Okay, so the nice counterpoint to that, and this is why the economists get excited, is that there's this like it's like dude at the University of Illinois, college professor, and he did this awesome thing. Just Julian Simon, he just wrote an article in Science Magazine. He said, you know what? He says, you guys are all wrong. He says, Ehrlich, you're just completely wrong. You're saying that more people are worse. And I think more people are better because undoubtedly there's going to be someone smarter and there's more people. The smart person is going to solve all the problems for us, right? So he kind of said, this is crazy to imagine that the world's really going to end like that. And he said, I'll bet you whatever you want. You pick the metals, and I'll bet you that the price of those metals will be lower in 1990 than they are today in 1980, right? And he just put it out there. Ehrlich took him up on it. So Ehrlich took him up on the bet, and it turns out that prices all went down in the 1980s. Simon won the bet, right? So, kind of fascinating sort of thing that happened in history, kind of fun. Maybe not. I guess it would be better if prices had gone up. I don't know. But nonetheless, it went down. But, Simon was basically using his economics intuition and saying that, the reality is in the history of everything we know about these non-renewable resources, prices almost never go up for a long period of time. They always come back down, right? So why do they do that? All right, so we're gonna get to that, why they do that, all right, here in a little bit. But first, we gotta talk about just a couple of definition, real versus nominal. Just so everyone has this terminology down, a nominal price is the price unadjusted for inflation, real price is the price adjusted for inflation. So the example here is the example of oil prices from the 1800s to the present. And the red line is the real price, the blue line is the nominal price. Okay, so the nominal price unadjusted for inflation. So we know back in the 1800s, the oil price was really low in nominal terms. But if we adjust that for inflation and account for the fact that everything costs a lot less way back then, and we think about the amount of oil that was consumed by people and their sort of overall consumption bundle, et cetera, and we adjust for that, then we see that the real price of oil is kind of like saying that the price that people then experienced, right, is actually a lot higher. So what we're trying to do is make a comparison between, say, people today, you and I, with people way back then. That, that the actual dollar value, because it's the same dollar actually that was used to exchange oil back then as the one we use today, right? So it's the same dollar, and we know that if we look at the newspaper and we say, what did the New York, Mercantile Exchange, which is where oil is exchanged today, what did they say the price was? Well, they say it was way down here somewhere, right? But in real terms, we know that for a person to spend that much money on oil back then, it would be like they were paying something more like this, right? So we're trying to sort of get that comparison across time with real terms, so we get, have the price in a way that is expressed in a way that gives us kind of an easier comparison with people of different time periods, right? And what it felt like for them to spend some amount of money. So now I'm spending, 45 cents on a barrel of oil in 1860 or so here, 1870 is kind of like us spending $45 on a barrel of oil, right? Okay, their incomes were $700 a year, our incomes are $70,000 a year, right? It's kind of that kind of a comparison. Does that make sense to folks? Right, so it's adjusting for inflation, that's how we do this, real versus nominal. And the effect of it is to give us prices that then allow us to sort of compare, kind of the relative cost of something in two different time periods. Okay, any questions on that? Because we're just going to use real prices whenever we do comparisons across time in this class. Or just the definitions. Okay, great. So what we want to ask about these non-renewable resources, how do we allocate them over time? Do we consume them all at once, save some for later? Divide equal amounts over years. How does technology affect that? Turns out that technology has a huge effect on this. We talked about it at the beginning of class, but we're going to talk more about it today. It really affects what happens to prices. It's probably had the biggest effect of all prices for all of these non-renewables. Explain more about why prices haven't risen over time. And it's these back stuff, right? It's not just prices or not just technology, but it's these dang substitutes, right? It's this idea that we're willing to substitute goods. So it's not just technology that helps us out, but it's that if this thing isn't working, we'll try that thing. We're all kind of doing that today, right? This is kind of the world we live in right now. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find that anytime I go to the store, it's something that I really liked the last time I always had. It's not there, right? Because there's all these supply disruptions, and we're all making do, right? We're just buying something else, right? So if a certain, I don't know, kind of food or something like that isn't in the store, I just buy something else. And I mean, I gotta feed my kids, right? I don't have to. If they were probably prefer that I did, they would prefer to just buy it from school. It's, you guys realize this is the best thing ever. I mean, the pandemic has been awesome for that, because all of a sudden the USDA is paying for all the food at school. It's just fantastic. I don't have to buy it. It's just great. And they like that stuff better. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what they do at school. I don't mean to go on and side on that, but I just find it fascinating. Someone else is paying for it, I don't care. But the real idea is, what was that?
I was gonna say, I think they had a program, where you could get, this isn't about schools, but you could get, if you were like lower income, you could get free food from like surplus from like agriculture, because the supply chain was so disrupted. And
They still
like,
have that.
we do, I think they like really dialed it back though after the pandemic, but I was like, oh, that's perfect, you know, stopping food waste and everything, but you can just use it for compost on the field. I don't know. It's a-
Yeah, just go out and get some of that food, and stick it in your backyard. It's a good idea. I like it. But you know, the idea here is that it's not just technology, but the idea that hey, we're willing to substitute stuff, that you and I will substitute a lot. Actually, that has a huge effect on it. That's had a huge effect on those price series. Because we just flipped from one kind of energy to another, right? Over the years, and we're just gonna keep doing it. Because we're practical. And we're gonna ignore optionalities for now, but we'll get back to them. Okay, now this is the crap part of the class, right? Discounting, gotta understand discounting. So this is another aside. The boring part is here, discounting. So you need to understand this, because this is gonna actually, the reason why we introduced this now is because this is kind of this is our thing for the rest of the year, right? Is to talk about climate change. Kind of moving all the other stuff, right? We're getting away from the dirty stuff and the clean stuff. We have to talk about climate change. It's all just turned out to be a discounting problem. So we have to understand discounting, all right? Probably had it in other classes. If you haven't had it in other classes, I really recommend everybody take a finance class. To me, that's like the most important class ever for you to take. So I recommend that. We're gonna do a little bit of that here, just so we get a basic understanding, but we're just trying not to go too deep into it. We'll have some examples when we talk about climate change, because you just can't avoid it with climate change. I mean, that's the issue, right? Climate change is about discounting. It's basically, are we going to take the bullet for the future, right? And that's a discounting problem. Are we willing to spend a lot of money today to solve a problem for someone, decades from now, right? You guys realize that? So, I mean, climate change. I mean, if all those hurricanes today and those forest fires are really climate change, that's baked in, right? The climate change that we're experiencing right now is done, right? It's already there. We're not getting rid of it. We're really not. So the only thing we're doing is solving the future problem, right? 100 years from now. Okay, so that's a discounting problem. So let's understand it. It's time value money. You and I prefer to have money today rather than money tomorrow. Does everybody agree with that? I mean, even if it's a small preference, we always have a lot of us have a big preference, which means our discount rate is bigger. But we all have some preference for money today versus money. We express that and we see that in the way we just make economic decisions. Loans are an example where we will willingly pay somebody for the ability to have cash today so we can buy something today. So we'll pay them interest, right? So we'll borrow $100 from them or $1,000 from them and pay them back in the future, basically the equivalent of $1,200, right? Because well, it was so worth it for us to have that cash today in order to get whatever it was that $1,000 was going to buy us, right? So that's the idea of a loan. Savings is the same kind of thing. You got some money in your hand, and you're willing to invest it in something else, but you want some kind of a rate of return, right? Or else you will use that money yourself. So if you're going to lend it to somebody else, the only way that you're going to lend it is if you are going to make some kind of interest money from someone else, pay you interest, borrowing your money, right? So that's an expression of this sort of idea of time value of money. All right. So savings and loans are two sort of examples of us having this time value component. It's a function of preferences, right? Kind of, again, a lot of people like to say this is economists forcing this on us, but it's not really. It's just economists observing that this is the way people do things. It's not really new, it's been around for millions of years, this idea of discounting. Just observing it and explaining it, right? And so a higher discount rate reflects a stronger preference for money today versus money in the future. So if our discount rate is 10%, then that means that we'd be willing to pay a higher interest payment to get access to cash today. Or if we're gonna sort of be induced to take $1,000 of our money and not spend it on something we want, but instead give it to somebody else so they can buy something they want. We have a high interest rate, then they're gonna have to pay us a bigger amount of money to do that, for us to give them that money, right? A low interest rate reflects a weaker preference for money today. So lower interest rate suggests that you would have more willingness to wait and spend your money in the future, right? Okay. The term discount rate in this class is synonymous with interest rate. If you're somebody operating at Bruce's level of finance, where he operated for many years, discount rate's gonna have a very specific term. It's gonna be very specific, so we can use it slightly differently. But in terms of this class, we're just going to make it synonymous. Discount rate is synonymous with interest rate. And we may also use the word rate of return for the same concept. Okay, so discount rate, interest rate, rate of return, all kind of the same thing. Okay. Yay. Present value and future value. Now, this is where you throw up, because we can actually put some math to it, and because it is a mathematical concept at the end of the day. So the present value is basically the discounted value of the future sum of money today. So we've got this example. Your grandparents promised you $5,000 to graduate from college. Has any grandparents done that yet? They offered you money to graduate 2 years. Have your parents offered you any money to graduate? Really? You should do that though. If you're gonna get on the 5, 6, or 7 year plan, you should just start negotiating. Extra payment from them. They all get out of there. Pay me some money. So my nephew was here and he did that to my brother. I loved it. It's great. He extracted an extra like $5,000 out of it. Bro, that's where I got this example from. That was awesome. Nice. Split it. Good. Okay, anyways. So how would you evaluate that, right? How would you evaluate that? Suppose you get in a bind. Suppose you're here and your grandparents have made this deal with you, right? You said, "Oh, I'll give you $5,000 to graduate from college." They don't tell your parents what to do. We're just going to do this. You don't want your parents to know. We'll give you this $5,000, right? And then you're here in college and you're like, that was much 2 years from now. That's doing a lot of good right now. So what am I going to do, right? You say, well, I bet I could get some money from friends. I can get them to lend me some money, right? Then I would have some money in my hand. So you're going to say, well, so how much can I get them to lend me? Well, I got to pay it back. So who am I going to make a deal with? I'm going to make a deal with my friend. I don't know. Anyone have a name you want to use for a friend?
Yeah.
Jeremy? Jeremy. Okay, Jeremy. He's not a friend of mine. Jeremy. All right, suppose I go to Jeremy and say, you know what? I'll pay you. I will give you back $5,000 in 2 years if you give me $4,367 today. And because I know this person, Jeremy, who is actually really wealthy, comes from a really wealthy family, super wealthy. And they're wealthy because they're smart. They make money off of stupid people like me, right? And he's like, yeah, sure, absolutely, great idea. Great idea. What's Jeremy saying? Jeremy's saying, you know what? This sounds like a good idea. I'm going to get a 7% rate of return then, right? Over the next 2 years, I'm going to get a 7% rate of return, and there is no bank account in the world. Anyone got a savings account right now? Is it paying you 7%? Nope, like 0.1%, something like that.
Maybe.
Yeah, some minuscule amount of money, right? So Jeremy's like, that is a hell of a deal. I'm gonna take that, right? So Jeremy's doing this evaluation and saying, I'll lend you $4,367, paying back $5,000 in the future. And he's implicitly making the bargain that he's making at least a 7% return. Now, how do I know that? Well, because we're gonna just use this discounting formula to sort of figure that out, right? That we can actually determine an equivalence between $5,000 2 years from now and 4,367 today. So we'll show you how to do it. Pretty easy to do. So that's present value formula. Yay. It's just what everybody wanted to see today. I can see it all in your faces. I can't see it in the smiles that you have, because I know everybody's smiling when it's this present value formula. But I can tell, and you're just like so thrilled. But this is exactly where you want it to be at this moment in time. So future values, the compounded value in any years of money that you save today. Okay, now 5,000 versus 4,367 example. Which one is the present value? Anyone? Which one's the present value? Okay, so that's today, right? So that's what I'm getting from Jeremy today. This is 4,367 in cash. The future value is 5,000, right? Because I'm gonna hand that back to him in 2 years. Okay, so present value is over here, future value is here, right? And we have this part, which is the compounding formula, which is accounting for this idea of interest. This idea that that present value is growing over time with that future value, right? And if we then put 4,367, and it's 2, right? 5,000 here. We can solve that with a spreadsheet if we want. Notice it's type 7%. So if I take 1.07 EB times 1.07 to the second power, I'm going to get to 5,000. Do it with the calculator if you want. I mean, the key on this formula is to understand the formula, right? To recognize that this formula allows us to equate a present value, 4,367, with a future value, 5,000. And then we can say that we're indifferent between the two. Like if the interest rate is 7%, then we're indifferent between having 5,000 in 2 years or the 4,367 today. Now, if that's the deal you struck with Jeremy, and your next best alternative, his next best alternative, right? His next best alternative to make money is a savings account. I don't, what's your name? What's your name?
Jason.
Jason, but Jason gets 0.1%. Right? That's his next best alternative. Is he happy with this? He's super happy, right? I mean, you could plug the 0.01%, which would be 1 plus 0.001, right, to the 2 power, and you can see that you're going to get 4,367 times something really small number. You're not going to get close to 5,000, right? So if Jeremy's next best alternative is this, measly savings account, which has no sort of rate of return on it, he's going to love this deal. He'll definitely take it if you trust him, right? He actually thinks you'll have the money. In fact, he might be thinking that you're such a loser, even though you're his friend, that you're never going to pay him back, that he's going to have to charge you that kind of interest rate, right? Yeah, every time you go out, he's always buying the drinks, and he's never paying, right? So he knows that, right? So he's going to have to require a fee return. Okay. Okay, present value, okay. Future value, okay. The concept is we're indifferent between the two at a specific interest rate or discount rate. Okay, that's just a number, right? So the nice thing about this thing is if you have a nice little calculator, you can do this compounding formula with anything, and you can really look at long time periods of just setting some money aside. How much am I going to have in the future? Any interest rate you want. So here's an example. If I have that's really should be present value of $400. I don't know what it says future value. Sorry. right? So I'm trying to figure out what the future value of this present value of $100 is, 10 years at 3% interest rate. So I put that $100 into the bank. On the side, I get 3% per year for 10 years. I'll end up with $134.39. Use that formula. Okay, easy peasy. Here's why you can do that, right? You just multiply in the first year, 100 times 1.03. All right, at the end of this first year, you know, in the second year, you get an additional 1.03. Right, so you figure the 100 times 1.03 times another 1.03. Third year, you're doing it again. Keep doing that 10 times. Turns out that's 1.03 to 10 times, right? So that's where that comes from. Honestly, I can test on that, but just stay where it comes from. Yeah. Okay. Now, what's more important is the effect of the interest rate on the amount that you get back in the future. Right? So the higher the interest rate, the more money you get back in the future. The lower the interest rate, the less money you get back in the future. Now, this is the hardest thing to think about, right? Because I mean, this is all just finance, right? We're actually interested in taking this future thing and bring it back to the present. Okay, and that's what we do when we talk about the environmental stuff. Because every environmental problem is about what? It's about a cost today and a future benefit, right? So we want to look at that future benefit and ask how much should we spend today to avoid that future damage, right? Or to get that future benefit. So, you know, if we have a low interest rate or a low discount rate, you can see that that would mean what? That, you know, you'd be indifferent between spending $100 today and getting $110 in benefits in the future, right? If you have a really big interest rate, what you're doing is spending $100 today, right? It takes a $259 benefit, right? Equate with that $100 today, this higher 10% discount rate or interest rate. So you can see that at a higher interest rate, if you're using a higher interest rate, then it takes a bigger benefit in the future to get you to spend $100 and feel good about yourself, right? So what that means is that, you know, it puts a big burden, you know, a bigger interest rate kind of puts a bigger burden on us, right? In a sense that it makes us, it's a higher hurdle rate. I don't know if you ever use that terminology or heard that terminology, but in order to get over the hump of actually being willing to spend $100 to fix some future environmental damage at a 10% discount rate, you have to have a really big benefit in the future, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't want to spend $100 on that. Okay, is that kind of making sense? So, I mean, part of this is about just the formula. Okay, so try to understand the formula. We'll ask you to sort of maybe use a really simple context, just kind of like this. But what's more important is to understand the concept behind it and what it means and implies about, especially as we start talking about the environmental stuff, right? And today we'll talk about the context of extracting crap from the ground. But in the future, we'll talk about all the context of, you know, how much you want to spend today to fix tomorrow's problem, which is essentially everything about energy and environment. Okay, so there's lots of interest rates. So, you know, 1%, 10%. Which one do we choose? All right, so there's a lot of interest rates. We have personal rates, we have market returns, and public rates. Okay, let's understand the three and then realize that all of the debate about climate change is really about what the public rate of interest actually is. All right, so that's, we'll talk about that throughout the rest of the class. But just what is a personal rate? What's a market rate? So personal rate is pretty easy. You know, that's just what you and I are charged. We all get different interest rates, right? If we go and make a car loan, someone goes out and finds out our history, there's something about our past payments on our past loans and stuff like that, something about our credit history and whatnot. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a rate of time preference, which is really going to be given to us by, say, the bank, right? Then there's a risk premium, which is kind of given to you and me and everybody else by kind of how risky we've been in the past when we have loans. And if you're, young like yourself, and you haven't had any loans yet, you're gonna sign a pretty high risk premium at first. Okay? And then once you had time to sort of pay off loans and show that you're willing to do it, willing to sort of play the same game that everybody else does, then your risk premium will go down. You'll get lower and lower interest rates over time. Then there's the effect of inflation, right? So the interest rate that you're paying is always actually a nominal interest rate. Okay? It incorporates the effect of inflation. So the interest rate you pay, some function of a rate of time preference, a risk premium, your risk premium in particular will affect inflation, right? So that's kind of what you pay when you go to the bank in charge. Okay. Then there's market rates of return. And if we look historically at, say, the stock market return over time, it's really not the stock market return at any one particular point in time. It's kind of like an average over some time period. Right? That's what we're interested in, the market rate of return. Yeah, people tend to say, oh, companies suck because they're just so focused on short-term returns. It's not actually true. Right? They like to look a little bit long-term. People like to look at them long-term. Most people aren't just looking at short-term, actually. So when we look at, the stock market, we say, oh, the stock market rate of return over time is been, since 1800 to 2000, basically 7% per year in that's in real terms. Actually, a little bit higher in the second half of the 20th century, right? That's a long-term average, right? That's not looking at any particular year or any particular week. It's looking at a long-term average and asking what's the sort of the market rate of return. How do we use something like that, a market rate of return? Well, that's where we get into the sort of the Jeremy, which is, Jeremy has opportunities to invest his big stocks of money in all kinds of things, right? And he's looking for the best things to do. And so he's always going to be thinking, well, should I, lend my money to whoever, my best friend or something like that, give me 7%, and I can put it in the stock market and make 7.8, right? In that case, he wouldn't lend it to his best friend. He'd put it in the stock market. Because he's making a mere 0.01% that Jason's making, then he's definitely going to lend it to his friend, right? So a rate of return is always kind of what is the market, right? I guess that's the best way to think of a rate of return. You have your individual rate, then there's the rate that the market's kind of giving on average, and that's going to give you some information about what current interest rates are out there. And finally, there's sort of the government or public rates. We often do something like the U.S. government debt payments. Those have been coming down historically. Pretty low rates right now, really low rates. Insanely low rates, actually, even lower than this right now. So we think of this usually as sort of the cost of money for federal public expenditures. So if you were to go and buy government bonds, it's kind of the rate of return you get on government bonds, 1 or 2%, something like that right now. Okay, so that's kind of what the government is now. The question always is when we evaluate, say, climate change, right? One of these really complex sort of environmental problems. Which rate do we use, right? Do we use the government rate? Do we use the market rate of return? Do we use individual rate? What's the right rate? We don't really have an answer for that. So that's why so many of these environmental problems are so complex, because there's no sort of economic answer to that question, right? There's different rates out there, but in fact, actually, we don't have an agreed upon solution to what's right. There's a lot of discussion about what the rate should be or could be, and people can make impassioned arguments that it could be anywhere from 0.01. And yeah, shit, think about it. What does one of these rates mean? So if you think about this in an environmental context, what does a rate of time preference mean? What does any positive rate of time preference mean? But Jason, your rate's 0.01. What's a positive rate of time for opportunity about how you value your kids versus yourself?
If it's positive, then I would need to value yourself more.
Yeah, yeah. So any positive interest rate means you're valuing the present more than the future, right? So that inherently means you're valuing yourself more than your kids, right? Absolutely, no question about it, right? So ethically ask yourself, is there any ethical standard by which you should value your next door neighbor in your seat more, yourself more than your next door neighbor? Right? Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should have everybody sit and talk with their neighbors for a second and tell their neighbor if they value their neighbor more than them. I mean, there's really not many ethical stances other than self-preservation that we value our neighbors any more or less than ourselves, right? As humans, we kind of have this idea of kind of valuing each other the same, right? We don't say that we value people in Canada less than us, do we? So why should we value the future less, right? So there's an argument to be made that discounting should be zero, right? In some sense, right? Because we're not gonna, I'm not gonna complain and say, no, I value myself far more than you guys. Sorry about that. I mean, seriously, if this room was blown up, I'd be the first one to hell out of the door. Okay, sorry about that. You guys are great, love you all, but I'm gone. I'm not here, right? Just kidding. I hold the door for you, trip out. Okay, so just the idea is we wouldn't, there's no ethical stance by which we actually should value the future less. Yet we do, right? So that's just that's the problem of figuring out what's the right discount. So there's that ethically that, but then there's the observation that with everything we do value the future less, right? So I don't know, economists really have argued about this and will continue arguing about what the right discount rate is for any of these sort of long-term sort of scale problems like this. We'll come back to that a lot. And right now, we just want to understand it, okay, the concept. All right. So how do we use it? Evaluate investment options. So this capital charge rate, that's based on its discount rate. Right? So we used it already in class. When we use the capital charge rate, we just gave you the capital charge rate. But basically, that's an interest rate or discount rate. A bigger number means that what? That the cost of electricity is going to be higher. So if our interest rates are higher, and the capital charge rate is bigger, than the levelized cost of electricity for that option is going to be bigger, right? We use it for benefit cost analysis as well. We use it to assess returns on assets or stocks, et cetera, to sort of determine what investments are going to be made or not. Okay, so back to this question, right? So we got to use this concept for the sort of resource extraction question. So we have these resources in the ground, assets, right? How quickly do we extract them? How quickly do we get them out of the ground? What do you do? How quickly do you get them out of the ground? What do you think? You do it right away, save it for later, split the production evenly across a fixed number of years. How do you handle uncertainty in technology? I mean, how do you handle it? What are you going to do? What do you guys think? Extract it as rapidly as possible? Yeah.
I would say, for the most part, extract it as rapidly as possible, but go back 200 years ago before I never thought of something like solar or wind, and who knows what will pick up.
Yeah. So you said sort of extract as rapidly as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. But then you sort of seem to say that as we start to see alternatives coming to the market, we extract it a little bit slower, maybe.
Yeah, or just as other options come up as well.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if if you're like Exxon or something like that, should you be extracting, should you be trying to get that oil? So if you're Exxon and you're looking out at the world right now, what should you be doing? Shouldn't you be getting that out of the ground as quick as possible, just simply because you're afraid that 5 years from now, you're not gonna be allowed to get it out of the ground anymore? What do you think about that?
Well, are you asking in terms of like the environmental impact or in terms of like what's best economically and financially?
Well, they kind of merging together, right? In some sense, I mean, Exxon financially, if they believe that the world's gonna regulate it and not let them get the resources in the future, they better probably get them out now, right? Or they're stuck. So it's kind of merged together, that's sort of the two, right?
Because won't demand be falling, keep that price down over the next 10 years? So we take it all out now, try to get it like, booked as fast as you can, most beneficial for you.
Okay, so prices are falling, if you think prices are falling, then you want to extract it really quickly.
Well, I mean, if they're gonna fall in the next 10 years, 15 years, then yeah, that's some of them start to now.
Okay. Get rid of it, get it out now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so think prices are falling. I can see how
There's
that,
like demand falling, I think they're just shift down.
I can see how that'd be a good strategy to follow, yeah. I like it. I like it.
Couldn't you also think of this as like related to interest rates? Because if you, if there's high interest rates, that means that the value of money now is, I guess like they're placing more emphasis, they're placing more value on that, on money now. So then you want to sell as much as possible and make as much money now so that you could potentially invest it or just loan it out and then you'd be able to make more on it. If you think about it strictly from an interest rate point of view.
Okay,
So that could be one factor.
okay, so if you have a high interest rate, would that induce you to extract more now or less now?
Well, I guess there's two sides of it because to extract it, you would need money, which would cost more now, but also the money you get from extracting it would also be worth more now. So I guess, I don't know.
So it's always a comparison, right? So you would actually, maybe as a well owner, you'd be asking a more complicated question, which is, my well has all this oil in it, right? And I can extract it now at this price, or next year at this price I think I might get, right? Or I could invest all that same money in some other activity entirely, right? What's the rate of return on that other activity? I'm not just
Depends,
rhetorically
depends
asking
on what
that.
it is, yeah.
Yeah. This is complicated, yeah, it gets complicated. Yeah,
There's also the idea if you extract as rapidly as possible now, you miss out on like future technology changes that would have made extraction cheaper and even more profits.
yeah, so that's even more complicated, right? That all of a sudden technology in the future may be cheaper. And you know, you can get it out really easily in the future. I think that's what all those people thought back in the 60s and 50s when fracking first started, it was too expensive. They probably think that, they got lucky, that's what happened, yeah. Yeah.
Probably also want to consider like storage and like depreciation of your machinery, like if you have all of these new machines, it's like, I don't want to just, they're the most efficient now, so it's better to extract more. But then it's like, if the prices go down, like, you want to store it, it's basically like, is the cost of storing it for X many years greater than the cost of just like leaving it in the ground, plus the cost of then having to go back out there and like do a whole other extra trip, rather than just like during the trip that you have right now, just extracting more. That's gonna take more time if you have to do a whole second trip to get it out of a different date versus just now and then storing it, you know?
Yeah, well, so you're raising a point, and this is a big storage bit for oil, right? And in fact, what we know now is that people can store oil down in the ground in a well that they haven't yet extracted from, or they can store oil in a bunch of tankers that sit out in the ocean, or they can store it in a bunch of bins that are above the ground, right? And so they're always going to be evaluated, well, like, take it out now, put it on the market, or at this price, or do I sort of keep it in here until next year and put it up on the next year, the price I think I'm gonna get next year. So I take it out right now and store it above ground, so it's then maybe a little bit easier, but then I gotta pay for that storage, right? That's super complicated. I don't have all the right answers, it's just bring up this complicated question, this is actually what these people think about, right? And they try to evaluate, how quickly do I take this stuff out of the ground? And then what do I do with it? Do I put it on the market now or do I wait? Because prices are gonna be changing soon, right? Okay, so I want to try to put some rationality to it. So there is some economics about this we can think about. That the economically efficient path is to maximize what we call net present value of the resource, right? So if you can figure out what you think prices are gonna be in the future, that's what you want to do, is to maximize this net present value, right? You would have an interest rate, which is the rate you've got capital that you're spending on this thing, right? And all the other crap that it takes to manage this stuff once you get out of the ground. That's your capital. Well, the well's capital too, right? You've got money invested in that thing, just all this stuff. Asset to your company. And you can either spend the money on that or a different asset, right? So you're gonna be looking at what your alternatives are. So that's gonna be that'll define what your rate of return is. All right, and it turns out that this maximizing net present value, given this interest rate or discount rate that you have, suggests that you would extract more in early years and less, and you would sort of speed up extraction in early years. But that the rate of extraction is going to vary with the interest rate, and the higher the interest rate, obviously, the more you're going to extract it, the quicker you're going to extract the stuff. All right. So higher interest rates will induce you to take more of this out of the ground now, rather than save it for the future, because it's more valuable to you, right? Rather than leaving it in the ground. There's a big opportunity cost, if you will, to leaving it in the ground. Okay. However, this is a hard thing. This is always the so marginal user cost is really one of the most important concepts of economics. But with respect to something like oil, it's a bit of a difficult concept to think about because we don't like to think of oil as having a marginal user cost. Why is that? Well, because what happens when you take oil out of the ground is you leave the future with less. All right. So when we take anything out of the ground, any of these non-renewables out of the ground, that means that the future generation who we care about, who we agree we don't ethically really want to treat it differently, is going to have less, right? They're going to have less oil. And I know that today oil is killing us, right? We know that, right? It's causing climate change, et cetera, et cetera. However, what you don't know is that your kids are all going to be smarter than you, right? They will be, I guarantee it. I don't like this stuff, right? So they're going to have oil and they're going to use it, and it's not going to cost any harm. I guarantee you they'll figure out someone's going to figure out how to do that, right? It's not inconceivable. So, and it has a lot of energy. I don't know, hell, a year from now, I mean, we may have to go to Mars to get away from Elon Musk, right? So, oil may be the only way we get to do it, by making jet fuel out of this stuff. All right. The point is that when we take this stuff out of the ground, we create a cost for the future as we're leaving them with less of it, right? Now it turns out oil is also a great example because there's two costs, and the same marginal user cost is used for both because there's also a second cost, which is the externality cost, right? We're going to get to that next, not here today, next week, I guess. So, oil is interesting because there's both the idea that we're using it, therefore the future can't. That's a cost. We're also using it and creating an externality that harms the future, which is also a marginal user cost, actually, right? Okay, so there's cost in the future of using this oil that we have to think about. All right, so marginal user cost is a definition. It's called the opportunity cost caused by scarcity over time. So any of these non-renewables have these marginal user costs. All right, any non-renewable that you use leaves the future with less, leaves the future impoverished, if you will. Does it in two ways. One is there's less of the resource, and the second is is a damage, a harm, like the climate harm. Renewables don't have the same effect, right? So, what's renewable? Well, if you're using trees for energy, right? If you're using trees for energy, there's no marginal user cost with that. Why is that?
Go grow back.
Yeah, they'll grow back. I didn't hear you say it first. Yeah, they'll grow back, right? So you cut down the ones this year, and then next year, the same amount of trees there, right? They grew back. So renewable resources don't have this sort of marginal user cost where your extraction of stuff means the future with less of it, right? It's just a particular thing of these non-renewables. Just other things can be like that. You know, labor's a little bit like that because labor, there's some marginal user costs associated with labor because we do get tired. Right? Unlike trees grow back, but people are, we get tired. Aren't really as effective the next day if they would do it by the day. And you can think of this in the sports analogy, right? Why is it? Why don't we have football games every day? Why don't the Buckeyes play every day? Right? It's a pretty tiring sport, a harmful sport, so it's a pretty big marginal user cost to play every day, right? They don't imagine most of those folks could play every day. Okay, so the marginal user costs typically apply to management of non-renewable resources. And we know exactly what the marginal user cost is. The net value of extracting a barrel of oil is $30 a barrel, the price is $60 a barrel, the marginal user cost is $30. Difference between those two things, that's the cost of the future rate. So we can determine exactly sort of the harm we do in the future. Okay, this seems stupid, I know, but realistically, this is how we deal with the climate problem actually next. So it turns out the same concept we use the value of climate impact. All right. So Hotel's rule is just a simple rule that says that if this is all true, if we're maximizing the value of that oil in the ground, that means the prices should rise at the rate of interest. So economists have this stupid notion that, and this guy Hotel probably should want a Nobel Prize, because died before the Nobel Prize came out. But basically says that if you're going to extract a non-renewable resource, the price of it should rise at the rate of interest. Because that's the only way you can actually pay the resource owner for the resource they have. Now, why am I telling you this? I mean, you guys, you know what you should be doing? Everyone should have an AEDE. Why does no one have an AEDE? Why are you not saying go back 10 slides? What did 10 slides ago say? Go back 10 slides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9. This one, 10. Oh, you know, this is a slide. Oh, this picture. What's this picture show you? Oh, it shows that, yeah. But what else does it show you about the price of the non-renewable, which is oil? What happened to the price? They go with the rate of interest? Didn't I just say the Hoteling, who I just credited with being brilliant, said the prices should go with the rate of, they get this fucking, the freaking prices. I mean, seriously, did I just tell you that? I mean, come on. They're going down, actually. What they did go up a little bit there. That's the rate of interest, right? So I guess you get two things out of this. You throw out all the economists, or maybe there's a different explanation. Maybe we should just throw out the economists. Oh, I should be pointing this, shouldn't I? There you go. That's why it works better. I think it bounces off of Thomas's head. Just kidding. He's worried about me pointing at him. Oh, technology change. So this is the point. So here's the idea, right? Then we got this guy who's telling that says there's a marginal user cost. The reason those marginal user costs are, as a result of this marginal user cost, prices should rise at the rate of interest. So these things were extracted from the balance sheet. Prices should rise at the rate of interest in order to pay the person who has that resource, the right amount of money to extract it at the right rate over time. But they sort of ignored technology change, ignored substitution, ignored all these other things that actually have far greater effect. So this is all just a technique to just point out that despite the fact that this is what should happen, that we should run out of these things, that those people who said that peak oil is correct, and we're all gonna run out of this stuff and be infinitely unhappy, right? So hoteling was kind of with them, saying prices should just keep rising really fast. Right? That, I mean, it makes sense. If you're peak oil, hoteling sounds the same thing, right? Peak oil, prices should be going up. It gets scarce, you're running out of it. You're running out of it, the prices have to go up, right? But in fact, actually what's happening is kind of this amazing technological change, it just keeps happening. It just astounds everybody. So I always love this picture. You just think from 1947 to 1997. We went from 19 feet. That's how deep flow platforms went to 4,000 feet. And now we're at 30,000 or 40,000 feet. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't tell. I just can't tell. That's one thing I can never tell if you think that's kind of amazing or not. I just sit there. You guys have all, how many of you have flown an airplane? Most of you flown an airplane? Right, so back in the days, flying airplanes are all the freaking time, right? It just astounds me. You're in an airplane. Someone's got a pipe from the airplane to the ground, basically. Right? That's what that is. That's I mean, just imagine that. That's a long pipe. I didn't even know there was that much pipe in the world. So it's phenomenal, right? So, but this ability to do this is the kind of technological change that has allowed the price of almost all energy resources to go down over time. All right, it's just technology is way over. It's done more for us than the effect of demand increases or some Helling's rule or any of these things have had on prices. This is just a set of prices for people. I know people say it cares about anything, but hey, the prices have gone down, right? Over time, yeah.
I'm gonna ask you to go back probably 20 slides, just to clarify. So I guess the slide where it was like 1% versus 10%, like the future values kind of threw me off because it's like, so the larger discount rate means that money is worth more to you in the present. So that means that it should be that the future value is lower because like the value of having it now is greater than like what it is in the future. So then, but then why
It
is
flips it though.
the future value much greater than the present? Shouldn't that mean that you don't want to, that it doesn't matter as much today because you want to save it for tomorrow when it's like greater value?
Well, a higher discount rate is going to induce you to get the oil out of the ground, get the coal out of the ground quicker, right? Because getting it out of the ground quicker allows you to convert it more quickly into cash that then creates additional return. I guess that's one way to think about it.
Okay, so it's like you want to get that $100 now so that you can get the more money in the future.
It's certainly, you have a high preference for
Okay,
it.
so it's not like you'd rather have $100 now than $100 in the future. It's like you just want to be able to have that capital to
Well,
invest.
to me, it's kind of the same thing. I'm kind of saying you have a high preference for the money now. So you also have a preference for extracting the resource as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but it's not like if you have a discount rate of 10%, then like. Okay, I just understand. I just can't explain.
Well, so keep thinking about the interest rate. So the key thing about discount rates and interest rates is that we use them pretty much from now to the end of the class, right? We're not gonna run through mathematical, do a little bit of math thing, but not much. But we're gonna use the concept that I talked through a lot. So we will use them. So it's good to get a grasp of it by the end of the class.
Yeah.
Maybe just think of this as like an introduction.
It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I've learned this like 4 different times in different classes. I know what it is, and then you learn it again. You're like, do I really 100% know?
Well, it's actually it's so important for the environmental component, that's why we spent time on it here. So, also because we don't actually know what the right discount rate is for policy decisions, that it's useful to understand it, so that when you get out there in the real world, you can argue for one way or the other, right? You know, it's your choice to argue for whichever one you want, but you have the tools then to argue for the one you want.
So the higher.
Can you repeat that right there?
The higher the discount rate, like the number, the bigger preference to have that one now.
Higher discount rate, higher preference for having cash. Okay, so higher discount rates also suggest that prices for all these non-renewables should have been going up. They haven't. The reason they haven't is because we have this massive technological change, which has driven prices down. Okay. So these improved technologies have really driven prices down, but we also have substitution in consumption as well. So it's not just improvements in technology, but it's the willingness of consumers to adapt and adjust. You're gonna need that stuff.
Yeah.
Come on, we're gonna make some complex stuff here. Okay, so we saw this example of sort of whale oil, the kerosene, wood, and coal, and natural gas. Coal and natural gas, nuclear, solar, right? We've had all these sort of transitions where we've actually made big differences and changes in how we consume stuff, right? We've switched from one technology to another. So it's not just the technology change, it's also the willingness of consumers to actually consume these substitutes, right? That help the price of all these non-renewables to actually decline over time. Okay, so the point is here is this way. It's a really simple thing. Just trying to use this as a way to introduce the concept of discounting. We're hopefully doing it in a way that's somewhat interesting because it is true that we thought that these prices should go up. So we think that prices should rise to reflect the scarcity, especially for non-renewable resources. But they haven't. We think we can explain it as a result of new technologies, substitutes, and backstops. So these prices have mostly stayed pretty constant, but they've fallen over time. The other thing is that higher interest rates should encourage more extraction. They should encourage us to extract more. Take more out of the ground. Of course, these things are all going to be challenged. We're at this odd time, it seems, in the economy. What's happening? We've got this pretty big increases in energy prices, actually, right? Just in the last year or less than a year, year and a half. And at the same time, you've got these interesting sort of labor shortages out there, right? So one would expect with these big increases in prices and really low interest rates, one would expect that we would start to see a lot of new sort of movement into extraction. I would actually expect interest rates to start rising. That's typically what happens when oil prices in particular have gone up past as interest rates have gone up. And there's an odd element of oil, which is that oil prices are, and this is not on the test. The oil price, well, this might be a test. Oil prices are tied to US dollars. They're always priced in US dollars, right? So it's a huge benefit for the US. So anybody who exchanges oil anywhere in the world pays dollars, US dollars for it. So in order to then go buy oil, if you're going to go buy oil up in the North Sea, you don't pay British pounds for it. You actually really, if you have British pounds, you exchange those British pounds to US dollars first, right? Give them dollars, right? It's kind of an odd thing about the way the oil market works. In the Middle East, if you're in Saudi Arabia, you've got a ship that you show up to the dock in Saudi Arabia and you're gonna buy some oil. You don't, if you're a Chinese ship, and you're taking that oil back to China to be refined, you don't pay yuan or anything. You pay US dollars, right? So you exchange your renminbi for US dollars first, and then pay the Saudi Arabians in US dollars. Okay, so this means that there is a connection between oil prices and the US dollar. So when oil prices go up, it's interesting it happens, the US dollar tends to be weaker in exchange rates because of the rise of prices of oil. So what that does is it tends to create inflation in the US, and typically the US only, because higher oil prices, higher, or a weakened US dollar means that for us to buy goods and services, it actually costs us more US dollars to buy goods and services, right? So that in turn then starts to push up interest rates actually, right? So kind of drive inflation, push up interest rates. So there's usually through a series of sort of economic connections, a connection between higher oil prices and higher interest rates. So we should see a big increase in extraction, but you know, the problem is we have so many labor shortages, it's not obvious that these companies are gonna be able to extract stuff. I don't know. Right, because it is somewhat labor intensive, especially for trucking and stuff like that, which is really critical for the fracking industry. Right? The traditional oil industry is not so heavily related to trucking, but the fracking industry relies on trucking, which relies on a lot of labor. There are a lot of other things that are mechanized, and we don't have mechanized trucks, right? So it's kind of interesting. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Okay. So one last example, the discounting problem. Can you do this problem? This is as hard as it gets. So you may have to do a problem like this on a physical test. We do it together. Yeah, let's quickly do it. What do you say? Suppose the benefits of a certain part of the work one-time payment of 5,000, 10 years from now. So we have the formula. My recommendation is just to memorize the formula. Hey, they took the chalk. It's awesome. Maybe we won't do it. Oh, there's one piece back there. Do that. Oh, there's a piece up there. Okay, so what are we gonna do? So we have that present value, right? Times 1 plus R to n equals the future value, right? Okay, so $5,000, 10 years from now, so it's 5,000 present value to future value. Okay, 5,000 is the future value, so I'm just gonna stick it over here. And let's just start with 7%, right? So then we can figure out the present value. Pretty easily, right? I guess. It's at 7%, right? 1.07. So I said 1 plus 07, I'm just gonna put 1.07. Okay, the 10th power, right? So then we can figure out present value equals 5,000 divided by 1.07 to the 10th. Jason, with that calculator, can you do that?
Oh, yeah, 2,541.75.
Okay, so the present value would be 2,541.75, so that would be the present value of the investment 7%. Did you do 3% as well?
Yeah, 3% is, do you just want the answer?
Yeah, let me write it down first. So it's the same exact formula, with the exception it's got the 0.03, right? And what was that number?
3,720.47.
3720.47.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. So that's the answer for it. So if your interest rate or internal discount rate is 3%, what's the maximum you would be willing to invest in the project? That would be that, right? 3720.47. Okay. Okay, so At 7%, you're different between 2,500 and 5,000, at 3%, you're different between 5,000 and 37. Okay, so the lower discount rate, it takes more money today to get 5,000 in the future, right? Makes sense. At a higher discount rate, you get a bigger rate of return, so the small thing, becomes a bigger thing over time, right? The higher discount rate. Remember, the rule of 7 is double the 10, right? 2,500 to 5,000. It's not exact. It's actually the rule of 0.72. It's actually, right? It's actually 72. Sorry, I lied a little bit earlier. But 7 is just easier for me, right? It's approximation. Okay, so that's as hard as it would ever get in terms of the calculation for this class, all right? So just remember that formula, apply it. Actually, I'll do one better. You don't even have to remember the formula. I will always give you the formula. You just have to know how to apply it. Okay. Okay, so next week is going to be interesting. Since you guys are assembled here, I need a vote. We're only going to meet one day next week. You have to watch the slides, though. So Bruce has his presentation up there. Do you want to meet on Tuesday or Thursday? What's your preference?
Tuesday.
You don't want to meet Thursday? One person? I'm sorry. You sure it's okay? You can come on Thursday, there won't be anyone here, but you can come on stage. Yeah. So we meet on Tuesday, it's going to be online anyway, so you can actually just get it. So we'll meet on Tuesday, then we won't meet on Thursday. All right. Now, there's an exam the following week. I'm actually going to show up and I'll answer questions for a little bit of time on Thursday if you don't want to show up. So it'll be a review session. We'll do anything new. I'll check your pulse to see if people actually want to do that on Tuesday. But my current plan is that if we just do a class on Tuesday, then Thursday we can just answer questions, whatever. Nothing to do on Thursday. Okay. And the exam isn't the following. The exam's the following week, actually. So, right, study guide will get to that next week. I promise. Yeah. I'll do that. Good idea. I will make an announcement on that. But yeah.
Is the homework 3 open yet?
Oh, homework 3, yeah, I'll get that up. Thomas just looked at it. Got it looked good to me, right? Yeah. Yeah, I'll put that up. And we'll get a fast turnaround on that. We'll have that turnaround, turn in by Thursday. We'll have it back to you by Sunday. So I'll get the solution to you by Sunday night. This is next week. Not this weekend. Next weekend. Okay, so no homework's due this weekend. Homework is next week. All right. And that's the last homework for the class. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how easy this class is going to be for the rest of the term? So just remember that. This is all designed for great SEIs. I'm just kidding. All right. You guys have a good weekend. Let's go.
Good.
I got a question.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I had one, so I had honor section. Last 2 projects. Actually. Oh. I'll send it out. It probably is. Probably is.
All right,
Yeah.
so let me take a look. I think
Kind of
A is
standard part.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like,
I tend to think problem oriented, but
let me first lay something like, so
So you should
that
answer
is,
the question.
let me actually discuss about.
I don't know what energy questions.
You don't actually talk about. the
Give me a
price.
question. Why hasn't the price
So
of
like price is like actually
Something like
moving naturally along what
So
the
intro would be
relationship
what's
between
the cost?
price and quantity or whatever consumption or solution. It actually moves along the way.
Doesn't.
So as you see, it gives the demand line,
Rational analysis.
as price goes down, demand goes up. I mean,
How is this
let's just this right, the downward line only, that's the demand side, right? As price goes down, it just moves along the line, so
I think it's long.
consumption naturally goes
Double
goes up,
digits.
which means. like,
Double
when
digits?
So when we discuss about like price.
It's double
price
space.
quantity,
It's
it's just like moves
You'll be great.
along the way. But the factor that was asked.
Well,
to
we'll see
explain is
how-
like the
You should
shift
worry
from
about it.
price
I'm worried about everything, so we'll see.
that
what-
Really?
we don't actually use.
How are you on the scissors?
You always use
I don't
something.
know.
right?
Yeah, you said it before.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Something
better.
like production
I,
line,
well,
production
I'm like, I
in this way,
in
this case, supply curve shifts
like.
to the right.
I
That
just,
actually
well,
requires
it's
something
like-
like
He's doing it
why
wrong.
the increase, why the production
I,
increase.
it's fine.
What's the
homework?
factor
Yeah,
of
I got
that
99.
production? So the correct answer.
The
for
lower
this
than
would
90
shift
the lower than
along
90
the
on the
right
first
side
one.
is like psychology of
It was the
balance,
first
like,
place.
you
Sure.
sure. But what you discussed here is only like the relationship between price
And then
and the demand. of
we'll just see how the
price.
midterm goes.
Which is
Not
actually
excited to do
Means
midterm
what moves
in
along the way.
Well,
So
you'll-
it's not,
you
but
should-
things still is too much.
I wouldn't worry
I'll
about it.
Be able to, yeah. it's gonna-
I can guarantee you.
It's
I
the
mean,
whole point is
you
about
study
time.
yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's about
You work
time,
hard.
it's too much, and you at least explain something.
I've never seen anyone in this
I'll
class
give you
ever
some
work hard on
discount.
Make sure if I don't come back to you,
Reassuring.
let me know.
Yeah, I
if
mean, it's not.
that doesn't happen, yeah, no, it's all right.
Especially if you got your grades.
I
on,
think it
you
was
know,
too harsh
the-
for-
the, Midterm, the
All right, thanks,
questions.
man.
will be kinda
Is there
like
anything else?
The quizzes.
All right, cool, yeah.
So,
Yeah, please come to me if you don't see any change later.
do I what?
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you reuse any
Yeah.
of them or is it totally new?
Oh, some of the questions, well, I don't think the exact questions, but there certainly are some of the same questions.